There is a specific kind of silence that teaches you more in 2 weeks than a friendship taught you in 20 years. It arrives after the first time you say no, not a dramatic no. A Tuesday evening you were tired, someone asked for something small, and for once you said you couldn't, you apologized, you offered to do it later, and then nothing came back. No call, no question about whether you were all right, just a polite word, and then quiet. By now you probably have a word for what happened. You were a people pleaser. You had no boundaries. They were takers, maybe narcissists. You have read the articles and watched the videos, and you can explain your own life fluently. And here is the strange part. Understanding it changed almost nothing. You still feel the pull to call them back. You still feel more like yourself when someone needs something, which means the explanation you have is missing something, not who was at fault. Something harder. In 20 years, what exactly did these people ever have the chance to reject? 1. The quiet test. Notice how small the moment was. That is the part almost nobody remembers accurately afterward. It was not a confrontation, and there was no speech about your needs. You simply had nothing left on a Tuesday, and you said so. At first, the silence meant nothing to you. People are busy. You told yourself that, and you believed it for about 4 days. Then you began checking your phone the way a person checks for test results. Not out of longing, out of something closer to dread. By the second week you knew, and the knowing had a strange temperature to it. Cold. Almost clinical. Because the truth is that you were not surprised. You were confirmed. And confirmation is heavier than surprise, because surprise means something unexpected happened, while confirmation means you sensed it for years and stayed anyway. Then comes the part that does the real damage. You start walking backward through the whole history and auditing it. The hospital visit, the night you drove 2 hours because they were falling apart, the sentence they said at your father's funeral, the one you kept, and you begin crossing things out one by one, as if none of it had been real. That reflex is understandable, and it is also a mistake, because whatever happened in those 2 weeks, it did not retroactively delete 20 years. Something specific was measured, and something else was not measured at all. But before we can look at what it measured, there is an obstacle in the way, and it is not grief, and it is not anger. It is the fact that you already have an answer, a good one, a modern one with vocabulary attached to it, and that answer is quietly preventing you from finding out what actually happened. 2. Your fluent explanation. You can describe yourself accurately in under a minute. You know the terms. You know about the nervous system, about the fawn response, about attachment styles and emotional labor, and the difference between empathy and enmeshment. You have probably explained your own family to someone at a dinner table and watched them nod. So here is a question worth sitting with. If your understanding is this precise, why has your life not changed? You still feel a pull toward the person who has a crisis. You still feel vaguely useless in a room where nobody needs anything. You still find it easier to drive someone to the airport than to tell them you had a bad month. Something is happening here that has nothing to do with intelligence. A name is a very efficient thing. It gives shape to confusion, and relief arrives instantly, and that relief is the problem. Because the moment you have a name, the search stops. You are no longer investigating a mystery. You are managing a diagnosis. There is a second effect that is harder to see. Every one of these labels is built on the same architecture. There is a person who did too much, and there are people who took too much. The vocabulary is new, but the story is ancient. Someone is the injured party, and someone is the cause. And that structure is comforting for exactly the reason that makes it useless. It places the entire mechanism outside of you. If you are a people pleaser because your nervous system learned to appease, then you are describing weather. Weather happens to you. Nobody asks what weather wanted, but something in you did want something, and it was not simply peace. That is the sentence this whole video is built on, and it is the one that most content in this space will never say to you, because it does not sell as cleanly as innocence. So let us set the vocabulary down for the next 20 minutes, not because it is wrong, because it answers too early. We will go back to the 2 weeks of silence and ask a more precise question than the one you have been asking. Not whether they loved you, what that silence was actually capable of measuring. 3. What silence measured. When someone disappears after your first refusal, you have not measured their affection. You have measured the structure of the thing you were both standing on. Imagine a bridge that people crossed every day for 20 years without once thinking about it. Then a single beam is removed, and the bridge goes down in an afternoon. That does not tell you the people crossing it were hostile. It tells you the bridge had one beam, and you were it. This distinction matters because there is an honest complication here that most videos skip. Not everyone who withdrew was using you. Some people were not responding to the loss of your help at all. They were responding to the sudden change of terms. For 2 decades, there was an unspoken agreement between you, and neither of you ever named it out loud. You give, they receive, nobody discusses it. Then on a Tuesday evening, you altered that agreement unilaterally and without warning. Some people simply did not know how to be with you anymore because the two of you had never developed any other language. That is not an excuse. It is precision, and precision matters here because without it, you will discard people who might have stayed if you had ever spoken plainly. But precision cuts in both directions. If one person vanishes after your first no, that is a story about that person. If 5 do, it is no longer a story about them. It is a pattern, and a pattern always belongs to whoever was present in every single scene. You were present in every single scene, not as someone who kept stumbling into the same accident, as someone who brought something with them each time, which raises the question that the label was protecting you from. If your availability was the only load-bearing beam, why did you build it that way? Not once, and not by chance, in every significant relationship of your adult life. Because there are people who walk into a room and simply exist. They talk about themselves, they disagree, they are sometimes in a bad mood and unhelpful, and they are liked anyway. You have watched this happen and never fully understood it. There is the colleague who does less than you and is adored. There is the brother who never calls and is welcomed like a returning king. And somewhere underneath, that has always confused you and slightly offended you. You explained it to yourself as luck or charm or thicker skin. There is another explanation. It has nothing to do with them. It has to do with what you did in the first 10 minutes of every relationship you ever entered. If this is landing, subscribe before we go into it, because the next part is where the story stops being about them. 4. The ticket in. A person who enters a room with nothing in their hands is taking a risk. The risk is not rejection, it is indifference. The possibility that people look up, register your presence, and simply feel nothing in particular. Psychologically, indifference is harder to survive than rejection, because rejection at least confirms that you registered as a person. Now watch what happens when you enter with an offer. You get a response immediately. Gratitude, relief, attention. Within minutes you matter, and you have disclosed nothing. That is the entire mechanism, and it is more elegant than any of us would like to admit. Usefulness is a ticket that grants access without exposure. It works quickly, it works on almost everyone, and above all, it removes one specific danger from your life permanently. If someone values your help and later disappears, they rejected your help. If someone learns how you think, what you want, what you are ashamed of, what you are afraid of, and then disappears, they rejected you. That second sentence is the one you have been outrunning since childhood. You may never have put it into words, but look at how you behave in conversation. When someone asks you a personal question, how many seconds pass before you turn the conversation back toward them? 2 sentences usually, sometimes 1. You have always considered this good manners, and part of it genuinely is, but part of it is a retreat. As long as the conversation is about them, nothing about you can be evaluated. There is a peculiar safety in the helper's position that is rarely named. The helper controls the distance. He knows the other person's weaknesses, and the other person does not know his. He is needed, therefore he cannot be discarded. That was the theory, at least. And this is precisely where the arithmetic failed, because indispensability does not prevent abandonment, it only postpones it. It postpones it until the day you cannot perform anymore, until you are ill, or exhausted, or grieving, or simply out of capacity on a Tuesday evening. And then everything collapses at once, because there was never a second beam. There is a side effect of this design that people rarely connect to the design itself. It produces loneliness inside company. You can be surrounded by 20 people who genuinely value you and still feel that nobody knows you. That feeling is not distorted thinking, it is accurate reporting. They had a detailed picture of what you do and no picture at all of what you are. That was not an accident. That was the architecture. And the strangest part is that nobody ever pointed at it for 30 years, including you. 5. Rewarded for hiding. There are 2 reasons this stayed invisible, and the first one is simple. It worked. Human beings do not audit strategies that are working. You had friends and invitations and a phone that rang. From the outside, your life looked like a life with relationships in it, so there was no reason to look underneath. We almost never examine our methods during success. We examine them during collapse, which is why this realization rarely arrives at 30 and very often arrives at 55. After a divorce, after an illness, after your parents die and the children move out, and you find yourself, for the first time in your adult life, with nothing to offer anyone. The second reason is more dangerous, and it is the reason the pattern could survive decades of therapy-adjacent language. What you built had a name, and the name was a compliment. You were not a person who was afraid to be seen. You were reliable. You were generous. You were the strong one in the family. You were the person everyone said they could count on. Sit with what that actually means. Your avoidance was applauded by every single person around you, continuously, for 30 years. There is almost no fear on earth as well camouflaged as this one. A man with a fear of heights is eventually noticed. A person who never speaks about themselves because they are terrified receives a thank you card. And this began earlier than you think, in a house where you learned it without a single word being spoken. Children do not negotiate. They observe what relaxes the adults, and they repeat it. Somewhere in that house, you noticed that when you helped, the temperature improved, and when you needed something, it got worse. A child does not draw a theory from this. A child draws a rule. And people told you that you were an easy child, and they meant it kindly, and it only ever described how early you had learned to disappear. In Jungian terms, what you constructed is a persona, not a mask in the sense of a lie. A functional face, built at the border between you and other people, designed to make contact survivable. Everyone has one, and there is nothing pathological about that. The problem begins when the persona is the only door into you. Because then something else happens, and this is the part that matters. Everything the persona could not contain had to go somewhere. The helper cannot be needy, so the need went underground. The helper cannot be resentful, so the resentment went underground. The helper cannot enjoy his own position, so that enjoyment went underground too. And what goes underground does not disappear. It waits, and it operates. And it chooses your relationships for you without asking permission. Which brings us to the question nobody in this genre wants to ask you. Not whether those people liked you, whether you liked them. 6. What you received. Go through the list. The people who vanished when you stopped supplying. And ask a different question about each one than the one you have been asking. Would you have chosen this person if they had never needed anything from you? For some of them, the answer is yes, and that loss is real, and it deserves grief. But somewhere on that list, something uncomfortable will surface. You will notice a person you never actually enjoyed. You complained about them. You made a face when their name appeared on your screen. You told your partner how exhausting they were, and then you drove over anyway, every time. That is not love, and it is not simply exploitation either. It is a third thing. You did not maintain that relationship for the person. You maintained it for the position you occupied inside it. Being needed pays in a currency that is rarely counted. It gives you a guaranteed place in someone's life. It gives you a task, which spares you from sitting alone with yourself. It gives you moral clarity, because a person who gives never has to wonder whether he is a good person. And it gives you something considerably harder to admit: superiority. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The helper is always the stronger party. He is the one who has his life together, and the other one has the debt, the chaos, the bad marriage, the crisis. As long as someone needs you, you never have to stand beside them as an equal. And equality is dangerous, because on equal ground, you can be compared and found less interesting. There is a phenomenon many people notice in themselves and quickly file away. When a friend you have carried for years finally does well, joy is not the only thing present. There is also a small hollowness, a barely perceptible loss. They no longer need you, and your role dissolves. If that is familiar, it does not make you a bad person. It means your attachment had a condition attached to it, exactly like theirs did. Their condition was your usefulness. Your condition was their difficulty. Two people, each holding up one half of an arrangement neither ever said out loud. And this is where the story turns completely. Those relationships were not one-sided because you were too good. They were one-sided because they were performing a function for both of you that had very little to do with affection, which is why they ended the moment you stopped paying your half. Not because those people were monsters, because you cancelled the only contract that existed between you. Now, most people who reach this insight do something immediately. They correct it, they set boundaries, they go no contact, they protect their peace. And a great deal of the time, nothing changes at all. 7. The boundary costume. Watch what usually happens after the awakening. The language changes first. You start using words like capacity and bandwidth and holding space. You announce that you are protecting your energy. You cut people off cleanly without explanation because you have read that you do not owe anyone an explanation. And there is real truth in all of it. But notice the shape of the new behavior. You are still not telling anyone what is happening inside you. You have replaced a wall made of service with a wall made of terminology. The first wall said, "You may approach me if you need something." The second says, "You may not approach me at all." Both walls do the same job. Neither one requires you to be seen. This is the trap almost nobody names, and there is a straightforward reason it goes unnamed. An enormous amount of content in this space sells the boundary as the destination. The story ends when you walk away, strong and finally free. But walking away is not exposure. Walking away is the persona-changing costume. The helper becomes the person who cannot be reached, and the underlying fear is untouched, because if nobody gets close, nobody can decline you. Look at how you cut people off, and you will see it. Did you tell your sister that you were hurt and wait through the silence that followed and risk her defending herself? Or did you go quiet, decide privately and inform her by absence? The second one feels stronger. It is actually the safer option, and the part of you that built the persona knows this perfectly well. There is a way to distinguish the two, and it takes some honesty. A real boundary is spoken to a person. It contains information about you. It sounds like, I can't take this on right now. I'm at the end of my capacity, and I want you to know that rather than just disappear. That sentence is dangerous because it reveals a limit that is yours. An armored boundary contains no information about you at all. It sounds like a policy. It is delivered from behind glass, and it protects you from precisely the exposure that would have changed something. Some relationships genuinely need to end, and some people are not safe, and none of this argues otherwise. But if you have set boundaries with everyone and still feel unknown, the boundaries were not the problem being solved. They were the problem, wearing a better outfit. If you have said no to someone recently and it left you uneasy for days afterward, write in the comments what that discomfort actually felt like, because we are going to look at it now. 8. Guilt versus loyalty. After a genuine refusal, relief is not what arrives. What arrives is physical. A pulling sensation in the stomach, restlessness, the urge to call back immediately and undo the whole thing, and a thought that catches most people off guard, that you have become hard, selfish, exactly like the people you spent years complaining about. A distinction is needed here, and it changes a great deal. Guilt and the feeling of guilt are two different things. Guilt is what exists when you have actually damaged someone. It is checkable. You can name what you did, and you can repair it. The feeling of guilt is what arrives when you break an internal rule, and it says nothing whatsoever about whether that rule was just. When you decline something an adult could arrange for themselves, you have not harmed anyone. You broke a rule, your own, the one that was written when you were 6 years old in a house where being useful improved the temperature. That is why a healthy no can feel identical to a betrayal, not because it is one, because your body is not distinguishing between now and then. It is only reporting that the condition for belonging has been violated. There is a simple test that helps. Ask whether the other person is actually in danger because of your no. In almost every case, the honest answer is that they are inconvenienced. Inconvenience is not harm, and confusing the two has cost you decades. Something else happens in this period that people consistently misread. Some of them will become reproachful. They will say you have changed, that you used to be different, that they do not recognize you. And you will hear an accusation and a verdict. Look at the sentence more carefully. You have changed is not a moral charge. It is a description, and it is accurate. You did change. That was the entire point. What they are expressing is not that you have become a worse person. They are expressing that something they relied on is missing. That is understandable, and it is still not a reason to go back. Then comes the night with the strongest thought of all. If I stop giving, perhaps nobody stays. This is the fear the entire architecture was built to avoid ever testing. And here is what people rarely expect. If you hold the line, some remain. Not many. Sometimes 3, sometimes 1. And the composition of that group will genuinely surprise you. They are often not the people you would have named as your closest friends, a neighbor you have coffee with twice a year, a colleague you never once helped, someone with whom you never established a currency, which points directly at the last distinction, the one this entire video has been walking toward. 9. Needed or known. Being needed and being known feel identical for the first few years. Both produce warmth. Both produce the sense of mattering to someone. They operate on completely different laws. Being needed is conditional on performance. It ends the moment the performance ends. It requires your presence, but never your disclosure. And it carries a hidden cost that only becomes visible late, because a person who is needed has to keep supplying, permanently. Being known runs the other way. It requires that someone has seen something about you that serves no purpose. The way you tell a story, Your opinion about a film that nobody else cared about. The thing you are disproportionately irritated by. Your fear, something useless. That is the criterion, and it is worth saying plainly. You are known through the parts of you that have no function, which is exactly why being known was unavailable to you. Not because you are unlikable, because you never released that material to anyone. It reduces to a single line. Being needed asks you to do something. Being known asks you to risk something, and the risk is always the same one, that a person could meet you completely and still choose to leave. That possibility is what organized your entire life. Now something has to be said clearly, because it is easy to misunderstand. None of this means you should stop helping. Generosity is not the problem. Generosity becomes the problem when it is the only door through which anyone reaches you. A person who gives and also reveals himself has relationships. A person who gives instead of revealing himself has contracts. And here is the turn this whole thing has been building toward. The painful sentence is true. Some of them never liked you. But it is incomplete in a way that changes everything. They never had the chance. They were never shown the version of you that could be liked or refused. What ended when you stopped giving was not their feeling about who you are. It was an arrangement, which means their absence is not a verdict on your worth. It is a verdict on a structure you built specifically so that no verdict could ever be reached. Let that stand for a moment, because it does something to the grief. It does not make it smaller. It makes it accurate. You are not mourning 20 years of counterfeit friendship. You are mourning 20 years in which nobody was ever given the opportunity to choose you. That is a different loss, and it is the only one that has anything on the other side of it. 10. Useless and present. The question at the end is not how to find people who will love you for who you are. That question sends you outward again, scanning other people for a verdict. The real question is whether you are willing to give someone something that is not a service. It is unglamorous, and it is harder than it sounds. It begins very small. Someone asks how you are, and once you answer honestly, not the large truth, a small one, that you are tired, that something has been sitting on you this month, and then you do not immediately redirect. You hold the 3 seconds in which you feel exposed and slightly ridiculous, and you let them pass without repairing them. It continues with something more difficult. You ask someone for help you do not strictly need. Not because you cannot manage, because a relationship only runs in both directions when the other person is permitted to give.
No.
Many people discover something unexpected at this point. They have spent decades denying everyone around them the chance to be generous. A person who never accepts anything holds the other side in a debt that can never be settled. And eventually people withdraw from that because the imbalance shames them. That was never your intention. It was still the effect. As for the ones who are already gone, there is no satisfying resolution available. Some of them will not come back, and some of them were genuinely only interested in the function. Others might have been capable of more, and the two of you simply never learned another language together. With one or two, an attempt is worth making. A conversation in which you say something about yourself instead of asking how you can help. Some will be visibly uncomfortable, and one of them may be relieved because they have sensed for years that they did not actually know you. What changes in the end is not the number of people around you. There are fewer, almost always. What changes is the question you ask yourself on the drive home. You used to ask whether you had done enough. Eventually you ask whether you were there at all. And when you think back to those 2 weeks of silence now, to the phone you kept checking like a man, waiting on test results, you are looking at something different than you were at the start of this. That silence did not tell you that you were worth too little. It told you that for 30 years you entered every relationship through a door too narrow to carry you through it. That is a heavy thing to see. It is also the only version with a future in it, because a door can be widened. Worth cannot. They never rejected you. They never met you. If this put words to something you have carried without language, leave a like and stay for the next one.